Our story continues. Chapter 20.
We have lost.
Rathma uttered again.
We have lost.
Tragul was oddly silent. The glittering stars shifted this way and that, and in their centers, a brooding Mendeln caught glimpses of a multitude of lives. Some were of the past, others of the present. Whether any were of the future, the dragon would not say, and that boded ill too. Uldissian's brother finally had to speak.
Surely, there is something we can do. The angels have not alighted unto sanctuary, nor have the demons risen out of the black depths onto its surface. There must still be hope.
I had always thought that,
returned Lilith's son,
because I knew that the burning hells would do all they could to keep the secret and thus move at a slow, deliberate pace that I could counter. I knew that my father too would not rush matters, for he has no desire to reveal his paradise to his brethren, nor face their stern justice for his crimes.
And so?
Rathma frowned. He suddenly looked his centuries of age.
And so, it all would have gone on as before, perhaps for 100 lifetimes more still. Yet, now that the high heavens are aware, there is nothing we can do.
Turning on Tragul, Mendeln blurted,
And you think this also?
It is not what I think or believe, but what the balance will demand. Son of Diomedes.
And what does the balance demand? Tell me.
The dragon reformed. The eyes stared deep into the human's own.
It is for you to tell me.
But all Mendeln could think about in the face of Rathma's declarations of doom was his brother. If Sanctuary was to end, he should be there at Uldissian's side. They had always sworn to do that, to protect one another. They were the last of their family.
I want to go to my brother,
Mendeln demanded.
I want to go now.
He vanished. Rathma stood silent for a moment, then also looked up at Tragul.
His choice is made.
As the balance will determine.
We are bringing the elements together. If they can survive my mother, perhaps there is hope against my father.
Perhaps. Your chosen successor was not even defeated by your talk about what will be if the high heavens and the burning hells do indeed meet in sanctuary.
No. And that with me, believing much of it myself, when I spoke it, in truth, Drag, this does likely mean that all is for naught.
If it is to be, it will be. Does that mean that you will do nothing more, as you pretended to him?
Rathma straightened.
Of course not.
The dragon made a sound, much like a relieved sigh.
And so, even in our hopelessness, there is hope.
Here it was then. Lilith's plan revealed. Once again, he had underestimated her power and cunning. If not for Rashim's desperate call, there would have been no hope for the Adiram. They would have focused on the Peace Warders approaching from the rear, remaining unaware of the other cloaked force until it was upon them. Whether the demoness desired to capture most of Uldissian's followers or slay them and start anew was a moot point. If it ended here, one way or another for Uldissian's dreams, then Sanctuary was lost to either her or Inarius. They would transform humanity to their wishes, a monstrous army for Lilith, or crawling worshippers for the angel. Uldissian reacted quickly to the warning, spreading word to the others. He urged Cerinthia and Timian to him, at the same time ordering the rest to turn around to face the new danger. They and those with them reached him but a moment later, and barely a breath ahead of the Peace Warders Uldissian had already confronted. With wild howls, the servants of the Triune leapt toward the line of Adiram. Uldissian maintained a calm in the minds of those near him, guiding their initial efforts. But two of his followers suddenly collapsed, writhing in agony for brief seconds before stilling. Uldissian sensed the spellwork of the priests and struck back at them. With grim satisfaction, he crushed their hearts from within. The three fell, already dead. The Adiram were not merely armed with their abilities. Uldissian was well aware that many were not capable of continuous effort in that respect. They wielded swords, pitchforks, and whatever tool they were familiar with that could easily be turned into a weapon. The first line of Peace Warders collided with an invisible wall, guided by Cerinthia's will. However, those that followed pressed at it, and so it became necessary to add attack to defense. For the Adiram, Uldissian first suggested the most simple of spells. A series of fireballs bombarded the breastplated warriors. Several screamed as they attempted to douse flames that could not be doused. The Peace Warders' advance faltered. Pleased by this turn, Uldissian sought out Cerinthia. She knew immediately what he wanted of her.
Go,
she encouraged him.
go. The others need you. We'll deal with these.
As if to emphasize her confidence, the merchant's daughter raised her spear and threw it at an approaching foe. Fueled by her power, it not only impaled the Peace Warder, but dragged his body back until it reached a second warrior who, although wearing a breastplate just as the first had, died much the same. The two bodies tumbled down. Cerinthia held out her hand, and the spear dislodged itself, then flew back to her grip.
Go,
she repeated with a smile. Nodding, he turned and ran to where Saren and the others had already arranged the most powerful of their Adiram for maximum effect and protection. In the center of the camp stood the youngest and the weakest, but as always, Uldissian had not left them unprotected. Not only did those among them that had the ability work to shield all, but stronger Adiram still kept watch too. Uldissian did not want the priest's spells striking at those least able to defend themselves. Saren looked very grateful for his arrival. Master Uldissian, we have tried, and we have tried, but we cannot sense those you say approach. Is it possible that Rashim is wrong? He is so far away. Uldissian had not had the time to consider the last point, especially since the warning had proven accurate.
They're coming all right. Saren, everyone needs to be prepared. There are many Morlu among them, and they will be harder to stop than Peace Warders.
The Tarajian turned bitter. Yes, Master Uldissian. I know. It was one of those fiends who slew Tomo. Having never heard exactly what had happened to Saren's cousin, Uldissian was momentarily at a loss for words. Then, he suddenly felt the wave of unnatural evil all but at the camp.
Make no mistake, Saren. They're almost upon us.
Uldissian sent out the warning to the others, then positioned himself near the lead. He spread his arms, ready to do as he had against the other attackers. But before he could, there came a sinister buzzing. Several in the lines looked up in puzzlement. Too late, Uldissian remembered what that ominous sound presaged.
Keep your shield strong,
he warned. Dark shapes, the size of birds of prey, flew out of the shadowy jungle. The buzzing came from them, growing louder and more frightening with nearness. One man screamed, As one of the shapes collided with his chest, the angular object had buried itself deep. 2 others also fell, struck down as if by lightning. Odyssean recognized the vicious weapons that the Peace Warders had once tried to use to assassinate him. The tooth-like blades on the edges were designed for maximum carnage. Blood soaked the bodies of the victims, but most of the remaining weapons in flight collided with air, then went spinning harmlessly away. Still, Odyssean could sense how unnerved many around him had become. Lilith was doing all she could to undermine their confidence, and thus their powers. No sooner had the bladed weapons come flying than Odyssean sensed the attackers flow forward. At the very last moment, as they surged within striking distance, the spell keeping them unseen fell away. A gasp arose from many in the forefront as the Adiram beheld the awful sight. More than one of Odyssean's followers fell back in fear. Odyssean tried to boost their confidence with his own, but it was a difficult task in the face of such monstrous foes. The Peace Warders made up the Triune's first lines, but they were not the bulk of the threat. That fell to the Morlu, seen in such numbers as even Odyssean could not have believed. He could not say what was worse, that so many existed, or that they all looked and moved like the same beast replicated hundreds of times over. Even more than the Peace Warders, the unliving warriors were driven by one urge: to soak their weapons in the blood of their victims. But neither they nor the Peace Warders were the first to strike. That dark honor went to the priests. Odyssean sensed their spells and gave warning, but even then, some of his people were not strong enough. Their wills, and thus their shields, were broken. Peace Warders, obviously alerted by the priests, immediately leapt at those vulnerable. For the first time came the clash of arms. Odyssean sighted 2 Peace Warders who had broken through the wall of Adiram. At his command, the first warrior's weapon turned on its wielder, gutting the man. Odyssean sent his second foe flying back over his followers and into the vicious throng from which he had come, using the Peace Warder as an effective missile that bowled over a dozen other fighters. The Adiram were being assailed on all sides, but they were for the most part holding their own. The Morlu had yet to join the combat, but would so very soon. Still, Odyssean had expected more from Lilith. And at that moment, the ground to his left erupted in a mass of horrific tentacles that reached out and grabbed people in every direction. 2 of the victims were immediately squeezed to death with such force that they nearly snapped in 2. Another was raised up and thrust hard to the ground again, his bones cracking audibly. Cursing, Odyssean had to abandon the front lines. He knew that he played into Lilith's hands but had no choice. He was not even certain himself how to handle the beast, but his powers were the best hope of defeating it before it killed again. Rather than seek to deal with every individual tentacle, Odyssean focused on the area from which they had sprouted. The demon, for what else could it be, had to lurk just below the surface. He could not imagine its size based on all the tentacles and their length, but it had to be enormous. Lilith had outplayed him yet again. Each of her attacks had been shrouded well. The effort had surely cost her and the priests, but it had served her. He had noticed the one, been warned of the other, but those 2 had kept him from ever conceiving of an attack from underneath. Odyssean had no notion as to the demon's weaknesses, but he attacked with the one most sensible. Raging flames suddenly burst at the point nearest to where he thought the tentacles originated. The fire burned not only above the surface, but also directly below. It had effect. The sinewy appendages flailed, flinging the creature's victims everywhere. Odyssean instantly spread his powers as wide as he could, creating an invisible net that caught each and every one of them. The effort left Odyssean panting. Sweat poured over his body as he sought to lower the Adiram to safety. Just as he was nearly able to accomplish that, something jerked him from his feet. Odyssean yet managed to keep his net working until he was certain that his followers would not be injured by the remaining drop, then ceased the spell. One tentacle had his left leg, another seized his waist. In his head, he heard Lilith.
If you no longer desire my embrace, dear Odyssean. Perhaps you will enjoy that of the Thonos.
She ended the comment with a throaty chuckle. Odyssean swore at her, but the demoness had already severed contact. He felt the tentacle crushing his leg and focused on his adversary. The Thonos was obviously an instinctive thing, not a cunning being such as Lilith or her brother, or even the demon Gulag. What fought with Odyssean was truly a beast, which gave him hope that he could outthink it. But first, he had to free himself. As more of the savage appendages turned his way, Odyssean noted that at least one had at some point in the recent past been cut off. The stub was still dangerous, but lacked the tapering end. That gave him a desperate idea. Odyssean reached with his free hand to his side, where he kept a long knife, only to have the knife snared by a smaller tentacle. That did not stop him though. Instead, Odyssean's mind seized the weapon of a dead peace warder, raised it high in the air, and flung it at the foremost tentacle. Energized by his will, the curved sword made short work of the Thonos' limb. There came a deep roar and a tremor that sent both Edirum and peace warders toppling. Not only did the ruined tentacle go flying back below the surface, but so did the rest. Exhaling, Odyssean started to rise. The entire area around him, nearly a quarter of the area of the encampment, exploded as a giant shape shot up from the depths. Screams arose as the nearest fled. The Thonos did not merely have many tentacles. It was tentacles. They all originated from an oval mass at the center, a mass equal to perhaps a dozen Odysseans. From every part of it sprung limbs of various sizes and lengths, more than 100, if Odyssean could believe his eyes. And in terms of eyes, the Thonos was also nightmarish. Over those parts of its body that were clear of tentacles were eyes. Very human eyes. Most were larger than a man's head, and all were not only fixed upon Odyssean, but doing so with deep malice. A score of limbs shot at him. Odyssean shoved his palm forward and deflected most, then had to leap out of the way as two others nearly caught him. He summoned the peace warder's sword to his hand and slashed at one, but the Thonos moved it out of reach. The gargantuan demon rushed him, moving swiftly on more than 20 other tentacles. From somewhere, it emitted another deep roar. Odyssean could spot no mouth, and hoped that he would never come near enough to find it. Lilith's face suddenly formed before the Thonos' macabre body.
All is lost, my love.
She mocked.
Look about. Your precious followers are falling to my puppets. See?
He would not have even deigned to look, for certainly it sounded as if the demoness sought to distract him further, but the Thonos stilled as if hypnotized. A simple-minded thing of destruction. It no doubt lived simply to obey what it thought was Lucian. Odyssean wished he could have revealed to it otherwise, but even then, the creature might not have ceased its rampage. Lilith continued to hold the Thonos in check. Odyssean finally did as she suggested, and saw that, for once, his former lover did not lie. The Thonos' rise to the surface had set into motion chaos among the Edirum, who thought, perhaps rightly, that they now had to fear a terrible danger looming behind them, as well as the relentless threat still flowing in from the jungle. Cerinthia's position was the most stable, but even she was hard-pressed. He dared not distract the merchant's daughter by contacting her, for already she fought against more than one peace warder herself. Those battling Lilith's second army were in the most dire straits. The Morlu had reached the struggle and were shoving past their living allies in their hunger for Edirum blood. In the face of such evil and aware of the terrifying fiend in their midst, the Edirum were not only losing ground, but losing faith in their own abilities. More and more were resorting strictly to physical weapons and defenses. Weapons and defenses that, against Morlu, put them at a severe disadvantage.
You see,
Said Lilith, drawing attention back to her and the Thonos.
Would I lie to you? You've led these poor fools to their deaths. They will be slaughtered, and all because of you. Unless...
He could not help but wait for her to continue. Lilith did not disappoint him.
You can still surrender them, my love. Surrender them to me, and I will call off the Triune and my little pet here.
Surrender them, so that they would be taken to her and converted to her evil crusade. The myriad of layers of her plot continued to peel away. Odyssean had no doubt that the demoness would also continue the slaughter until he finally acquiesced. For a moment, he considered her demands. So many lives would be saved. There would be no more blood. But only for the moment. He had only one answer for her.
Better that we all die, Lilith, than kneel to you even once.
And with that, he thrust out his hand, aiming for the eye most dominating this side of the Thonos. What began as a stream of light shot through Lilith's smiling countenance, which vanished in its wake. Before the light reached the monstrous demon, it transformed, solidifying into a gleaming lance. The point buried itself in the pupil. A yellow pus burst from the eye, and the Thonos roared anew. Scores of tentacles sought for Odyssean, who had to fight with all his wit and agility to avoid them. Some were so heavy that if they had reached the son of Diomedes, they would have surely crushed him. Others were so fine that he suspected the Thonos of using them like whips or nooses. Either way, Odyssean dared not let any get through to him. If there was any consolation in his desperate situation, it was that the beast was now obsessed only with him. It utterly ignored the Adiram, a fortunate thing in that they were already struggling merely to survive. The Morlu had begun cutting a bloody swath through the left flank, their laughter chilling even Odyssean's heart. He knew that he could have helped turn, or at least stem the tide, but only if the Thonos was defeated. Yet that in itself would take far too long. If it was even possible. The loss of its eye had more angered the demon than it had injured it. It was just as likely, perhaps even more so, that Odyssean would soon perish, but he continued to dodge and deflect the tentacles, amazed for each second that he managed to avoid them. The Thonos roared over and over, its tone almost suggesting that it was becoming annoyed at this gnat's persistence. Then, without warning, he was grabbed at the ankle. Odyssean toppled. A smaller tentacle had risen out of the ground, rising up like a serpent from its nest to encircle his lower leg. Odyssean had underestimated the monster's intelligence, perhaps fatally. He moved to slice at the appendage, but another tentacle caught his wrist while a third tore the sword away. A fourth pummeled his chest, forcing the air from his lungs. Odyssean nearly blacked out. A part of him wondered if that might be for the best. What was left? But for him to witness the destruction of the Adiram and his own grisly demise? Yet he struggled, albeit feebly. Odyssean could not regain his breath, and thus enough wit to use his powers. He felt the Thonos drag him toward it. Through blurry eyes, Odyssean finally caught sight of the mouth, a menacing beak-like projection underneath the demon's body. A thick tongue dripping with saliva thrust out of the mouth, seeking him. Stirred by the sight, Odyssean managed to send a bolt of pure force at the mouth. It struck the tongue, searing it. Letting loose an ear-pounding sound, the demon pulled back its tongue, then shut its mouth. The tentacles holding Odyssean tightened painfully. If it could not eat the human, the Thonos evidently would be satisfied with crushing him. Then, Odyssean sensed a figure near him. His mind flashed back to the jungle when Mendeln had come to his rescue against the ancient demonic presence. He had wondered where his brother was in all this. Should not the fate of the Adiram have been integral to Rathma and the dragon? Would not Mendeln himself have sought to come to his sibling, just as Odyssean would have come to him? Something happened, but what it was, a weary Odyssean could not say immediately. He only knew that the tentacles abandoned him. Air filled his lungs. The Thonos bellowed angrily.
Mendeln.
Odyssean managed, shaking his head to clear both it and his vision.
Mendeln. I knew you'd...
It was not Mendeln. Achilleos stood next to him, firing one arrow in rapid succession after another. Those bolts, those seemingly insignificant bolts, struck true against each of the visible orbs of the demon. But more to the point, after they hit, they dissolved in an explosion of energies far more deadly than the point of an arrow. 6 eyes were ruined, and blue lightning crackled from each. The Thonos shivered, and many of its limbs flailed about without reason. Achilleos, standing like some dread guardian, pulled arrow after arrow out of his quiver, and never seemed in danger of running out. Recovering from his shock, Odyssean called out,
Achilleos, what?
Without missing a shot, the archer turned his gaze to his old friend. Achilleos' eyes blazed white, expressionless. He said,
Go, Odyssean. You are needed.
With that, the blonde figure returned to firing. For the first time, the Thonos showed some hesitation. Several tentacles wiped at the eyes already targeted. Others began churning up the ground. Odyssean, still uncertain as to whether to leave Achilleos alone against this behemoth, recognized immediately what the Thonos was doing.
It's going to burrow,
he shouted to the hunter.
It's going to attack from underneath.
To this, Achilleos remarked in the same monotone voice as before.
No, it will not. Go now, Odyssean.
This time, Odyssean listened. He did not understand this latest face of his childhood friend, but what mattered was that Achilleos did appear to be holding the Thonos at bay. At the very least, Odyssean hoped to salvage the Aedirum and then return to help the archer, if all of that was yet possible. The struggle with the Morlu had turned very desperate. The one beacon of hope centered around Saren. The Taragian, looking almost as fierce as the helmed warriors, wielded a long, slim sword, and at first appeared to be simply using skill against his insidious adversaries. However, each time the sword hit, a flash of blue accompanied the slice. In this particular case, the result was the toppling of a Morlu's head the next moment. But other than those surrounding Saren, the Aedirum were in retreat. The Morlu and surviving peace warders trod over the bodies of the dead, eager for more victims. Pausing to catch his breath again, Odyssean glared at the encroaching villains. He spied a Morlu about to slay a Taragian, and fury took over. The Morlu let out a hiss as the blade in its hand melted. That hiss turned into a howl as the creature's gauntleted hand followed. Odyssean did not stop until he had reduced the Morlu to a bubbling mass, an act that took him all of 3 breaths. The Aedirum realized that he was with them again. Their confidence visibly rose. Under Odyssean's guidance, the line began to strengthen, even push back in some places the servants of the temple. Then, a Parthian whom Odyssean had thought slain rose up again, axe in hand. Next to the man, a Taragian also stood. Odyssean cheered at this sight, until a peace warder whose throat was a bloody tangle of sliced flesh and sinew joined them. All 3 turned to face the defenders, and all 3 began attacking. All 3 were dead. Cerinthia's anxious voice filled his head.
Odyssean, the slain, theirs and ours. They're rising, all of them. They're rising.
They were indeed. Everywhere that he looked, Odyssean saw that those who had been killed were now standing. Some of them lacked limbs, even heads. Whether Aedirum, peace warders, priests, or Morlu, those still intact enough were now back on their feet. And all now marched with the rest of Lilith's servants against Odyssean and his followers.